Welcome along to another episode of the Play On podcast. I'm David Simmons. We're going to be talking all things Scottish football. I'm David Simmons, as I said, and delighted to be joined as always every week by Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons. Make sure you stay tuned for the next hour as we look back on the weekend's Scottish football in action, the highlights and the key talking points. On tonight's show, we're discussing the COVID impact as Celtic today release a pre-tax loss of £6 million. Now, we want to hear from you guys. As always, every week we are fully live and interactive. Make sure you get on over to Twitter, follow the Play On podcast, get onto YouTube and subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel as well. Right, another busy week. Stephen, let's start with you, mate. Celtic have revealed a pre-tax loss of almost £6 million after a decrease in revenue of almost a quarter in the club's half-year financial report. So this all comes as Chairman Ian Bankier says that Neil Lennon's squad is remained intact in a bid to win a 10th successive Scottish Premiership title. That was one of the key two factors. Obviously, the other was the adverse impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, he went on to say more in that press release, but what do you take from that statement from Ian Bankier?
To be honest, the statement itself, I mean, obviously he had kind of dressed it up in the way that he was addressing the Celtic fans and all of the numerous queries and questions that they've had over the last couple of months. Major concerns that have been voiced on numerous different platforms. But I don't think the statement itself, other than the massive loss that obviously Celtic have made, it didn't actually say, it said a lot without saying anything at all, really. It was a lot of stuff that was mentioned in it were things that had been rehashed, things that Neil Lennon has said himself. And I mean, the things that you've got to take from it is that they didn't back Neil Lennon. They didn't publicly say he's our man and he will be the Celtic manager for the foreseeable future. But they also didn't come out and say, yeah, we're really considering changing things or anything like that. Which you can understand. They're a public limited company. They're not going to put things like that out in press releases like this. But yeah. Again, I think it would, if I was a Celtic fan, it would probably annoy me more than anything else that this has come out, and it's almost another attempt from Celtic to kind of just brush these concerns aside. No, guys, we know what we're doing. Don't worry about it. And some of the points you made are perfectly valid in terms of, from a board point of view, at the start of the season, if they'd sold Edouard, if they had sold whoever the other ones who were in demand at that time, and then they had gone on to have the season that they've had now, they would be, I mean, there would be people trying to kick their doors in at Parkhead, you know what I mean? But I think the fact, what they're trying to say is, well, we supported Neil Lennon in every way we can. We've let him retain the players we've added. We've spent a lot of money and trying to kind of strengthen the squad and go forward. But at the same time, the result is what the result is, and they are where they are. It is not an acceptable position, and I understand £6 million losses, and you're going to have to maybe dip into that fund again to pay off Neil Lennon and his staff. But the Celtic fans will still be screaming from the rooftop that they want actions and they want proper answers.
Well, that's it. I mean, Ian McIntosh commented just now that lots of fans are worried that Lennon will remain in charge. I mean, in the statement today, it said, I must state clearly that all decisions we take will be taken calmly and rationally. He said that we will not make any hasty decisions that we might regret. Do you think that was specifically aimed at Neil Lennon, Stephen?
I think so, yeah. I mean, what else can it be referring to? They are obviously trying to sort of say, listen, guys, we're not going to be rushed into this. We are going to take our time. But there's taking your time, and then there's dragging your heels over something that is blatantly obvious. I mean, we've been talking about it on this show alone, and this is not even like a Celtic-minded podcast. So we've been talking about this situation since November, and that's been like, I think Celtic-minded podcasts and people who are Celtic 24/7, they've been talking about it a lot longer than that. And the whispers of maybe Lenny's not the right man very quickly turned into, he is definitely not the right man, we need to get rid of him. But the fact that they didn't do anything, if they'd come out maybe 3 or 4 months ago and said, we'll not be rushed into a decision, we're going to take our time, that's fair enough. But you've had time. You've had enough time to make a decision. And to me, him still being in charge now and not and being loosely publicly backed by the chairman of the club suggests to me that there is a good chance that Neil Lennon will still be there next season.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Anthony, welcome to the show this week, mate. What I want to say to you, mate, is a few weeks back, maybe even a month or so ago now, you said that clubs might get to the stage during this pandemic when they need to sell their prized china, their key assets. There was a statement today on a very reliable website that Arsenal have been told that they can sign 23-year-old Celtic striker Odsonne Edouard for just 15 million. Is that Celtic now at the stage where they are having to sell their prized china?
I think every club in Scotland's probably in a predicament whereby if the right offer came in, they would have to seriously consider it. I mean, obviously we've spoken about Edouard before, and he was valued pretty highly maybe a year ago, maybe in the high 20s, mid 20s or whatever, or that was the sort of general consensus anyway. I'm not sure how legitimate that was in terms of would people have actually paid that at the time. I think we even said about a month ago, if anybody offered 10, 15 million quid for Edouard, Celtic would bite their hand off for that type of money. But obviously he's hit a bit of form again in the last month or so, and he now is getting back to that level that he was at when his star was on the rise a year ago, or even 2 years ago. So there will be people interested, and if people know Celtic are potentially not struggling, but their obviously finances are becoming a bit of an issue, as they are at every club with no supporters in the stadium, but particularly so for Scottish clubs. I think there would be an onus on Celtic to. I mean, I think it's generally accepted that Edouard's going to move on in the summer anyway, regardless of whether he stocks high or not. If he stocks high, he'll be able to command Celtic will be able to command a slightly higher fee for him. If he's not doing well, they're not going to want to keep hold of a player. They'll just probably cut their loss. Well, take what they can get for him if he does lose his way. But it certainly looks like he's hitting form at the right time in terms of going on a wee scoring run in the second half of the season at a point when it's widely accepted that he probably will be leaving Celtic this summer, regardless of the fee. But I think, I don't know what Celtic will be looking for at this stage, but I think I would be inclined to take 50 million quid and go and rebuild, get another attacker in that you know is here for a slightly longer period, because it does feel like Edouard is a player who is going to want to follow Cham out the door and all these other guys who've come in and used Celtic almost as a stepping stone to go elsewhere. And I think it's been pretty clear that that's the way Edouard's viewed his move to Celtic. And to be fair, he's paid his dues. He's scored lots of goals for them over the past few seasons, won them a lot of trophies. So it's been a move that's worked well for both clubs, assuming that this is the last few months of his time at the club.
Yeah, no, going back to the figures, Stephen, obviously Celtic have come out with this statement today. Do you expect other clubs maybe now to release similar losses? I mean, obviously Celtic have high outgoings. There'll be smaller clubs like we touched on off air, Livingston, etc., who have only maybe got 2,000 season ticket holders, which might obviously be a slightly lower loss, if you like. But do you expect other clubs to now make a similar post now?
I would imagine so, to be honest. I know that obviously the likes of Kilmarnock, they took advantage of the scheme that the government put in place, where loans were put in place for teams who were just needing a boost in the cash flow. But I mean, I just don't see how even the most pessimistic football owner and football board must have been looking at this at the start of the season thinking, Christmas. If we can get to Christmas, we'll be all right. By that time, the fans will be getting in dribs and drabs and the money will start rolling back in. But it's everything for football clubs. The retail side, the hospitality, the sponsorship, all these things have gone up in smoke, because if you're a struggling local builders merchant in Kilmarnock and you've bought a pitch side advertising board, knowing that 10,000 people are going to be going to Rugby Park every week, and suddenly there's nobody going to Rugby Park, and the only folk who are ever seeing your board are when it's on telly, they're going to be looking for refunds or deductions, maybe for reductions for next year. So all these things need to be taken into consideration. And I know that's a boring thing to talk about on a football podcast, but business is business, and football clubs without fans are nothing. And that financially is 100% the case. Like these smaller clubs, as you say, might have lower wage bills, but it's all about the ratio, the turnover, your turnover to salary ratio, and majority of teams are in the same ballpark. So if their incomes have dramatically dropped, unless they've convinced all their players to take a pretty much permanent pay cut, then it has to be the case that they're going to be coming into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking through some of the comments that's coming in. Hi to Dan. It says the latest statement's not going to do anything for season ticket sales. Tell us if the manager's been replaced or not. That's what everyone wants to know. Is that a fair comment, Anthony, from Dan there? Obviously a Celtic supporter who wants to know what the future of his club is before he buys a season ticket.
It's a fair comment in the sense that I think that's generally what most supporters will be feeling, but I don't think a supporter should be holding the club to ransom in the sense that I'm only going to buy a season ticket if you change the manager. That's not what being a supporter is all about. You support the club, whoever the manager is. Yes, you can voice your anger, your frustration and what have you. You can say, I want Neil Lennon to go, I want a new guy in. But fundamentally, if you're a supporter of the club, you don't renew your season ticket, generally speaking, based on who the manager is. Unless there's some kind of general protest going, like where people are trying to oust a chairman or something like that. But I mean, fundamentally speaking, I don't like this idea that you don't buy a season ticket if you don't like the manager. That goes against the ethos of what I understand to be a football supporter, come hell or high water. So in that regard, I can understand the fans' frustrations, though they do want to know. They have a deep-rooted desire just to know who their manager of the football club is going to be. But the simple fact is, Neil Lennon is currently the manager. They've never said otherwise. Celtic have never indicated otherwise. They've never given any suggestion that they're going to change the manager. Now, we're all assuming that they're going to change the manager because ordinarily football clubs tend to change the manager when the going gets tough. But I mean, you look at the situation that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was in at Man United 3, 4, 5 months ago. Everybody thought he was a goner. He looked dead man walking, very similar to what Neil Lennon's looked like. I mean, you felt with Solskjaer, it was just a case of going through the motions until they decide to pull the trigger and then hire somebody of a higher calibre or whatever. And then he ends up taking them at the top of the league. Now, I wonder if because there's no fans in stadiums, you see it with Derek McInnes as well, getting time when everybody assumed he was right under it. It looks like Aberdeen are going to back him for now. They may well change him very much like Neil Lennon in the summer, but there's certainly no indication coming from Aberdeen that they are ready to sack him.
Yeah, I'm kind of smirking here, Anthony, because just as you said that with the fans in the stadium, I've read this comment here. Once fans are back, he won't last a month. And that kind of backs what you've just said there, that it could be a different feel because fans aren't really, I feel, this season getting their voice heard because they're not there.
That's what I was going to say as well. Like I think what I mean, obviously I'm not within that guy's mindset of what the commenter that put that message up, but I think from a Celtic point of view, it's quite similar to the situation that we had at Hearts in terms of when Craig Levein was there, and there was so much vitriol. Like there was so many people within the supporters group were just wanting rid of this guy, and there was loads of people who I saw who were saying, well, when I might stop my Foundation of Hearts donations and I might do this and that, because these people see that as the only way to communicate with these clubs nowadays in modern day football, that the only way that a football club will listen to the fan groups and listen to the overall base of the fans is if they start saying, well, how about we don't buy the new strip this season? How about we don't do this? If you look at the South as a perfect example, Arsenal situation when they had Arsene Wenger, it turned poisonous. Like this is a guy who had given loads and years of service to this club, but it was obvious for everybody that his time was up. And it wasn't until Arsenal played a midweek game, I think it was a Europa League match, and they got 20,000 or something at the game. And they then started looking at it and their sales were down on replica kits. And people, that was because there was a movement put in place to stop the money going into the club until they felt that their voice was heard. And I think a lot of Celtic fans will be in that boat at this moment in time where they will see not getting a season ticket as not a petulant, I'm not getting my way because my choice of manager isn't in. It'll just be their way of trying to make themselves heard, trying to make their voice and their opinion matter at something that's so important to them in their football club.
Yeah,
the thing that makes this Celtic situation slightly interesting is that a month ago or whatever, Neil Lennon couldn't buy a result. He had all that trouble when they came back from Dubai, and then they were stumbling from one calamity to another on the pitch. They're now on a 4-game winning streak. Now, I don't envisage Celtic maintaining that to the end of the season, but let's assume they do. Let's play devil's advocate and assume they win every single game between now and the end of the season, including beating Rangers twice, which is not beyond the realms of possibility. It's unlikely, but I mean, let's say Celtic win every game bar one. They cut the gap and they finish maybe 6 points, 9 points behind Rangers at the end of the season. But they go into the summer having won the Scottish Cup and on the back of winning the last 20 games of the season or 18 out of 20, the vibe will have changed. There will be plenty of people who are still adamant that Neil Lennon cannot.
Oh, here we go.
I don't think the vibe will have changed because you've got to remember this is a fan base who 10 in a row is all that has mattered to these guys, and people can laugh at me and say that that's not the case, and we are Celtic and we follow them through and through. They've been singing about 10 in a row since about 3 in a row. So for 7 years, all they wanted was their page in history, and obviously the quadruple treble has done that, but they wanted it to be against their biggest rivals. They wanted to go one better than what Rangers have done. So this 10 in a row was all that mattered. So even if Neil Lennon rallied the troops and Rangers stuttered a bit and Celtic finished 1 point behind Rangers, if Celtic don't win this league, he is out. As far as the fans are concerned, he's a dead man walking.
Let's say, again, very unlikely, but let's say Celtic win the next 2 Old Firm games or take 4 points from them, close the gap, and then Celtic beat Rangers 3-0 in the cup final on the last day of the season. Do you not think, though, that I know this is hypothetical and it's very unlikely, but I would say Celtic fans have already given up on the title. I think Celtic fans probably gave up on the title in December. By the time that scenario comes to fruition, 5 months will have elapsed. The sun will be shining. It will be going into the summer months. People will be excited about getting back into stadiums. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but that situation is. I wonder if Celtic are hoping, let's just ride out this storm and see if he can salvage, get something going again, because he's the man we want to keep faith in. I'm not saying they are, but if he was to win the last 20 games of the season, I think it would be I think you'd struggle to make a case for getting rid of him. I know that seems ridiculous.
I agree with you. And from a purely statistical point of view and looking at it, but the Celtic fans will not accept that. That's the long and short of it. If they don't come back and win this league, which obviously none of us expect to happen, then they want rid of him. End of story. It doesn't matter what he does between now and then. It doesn't matter if he wins the cup. It doesn't matter if he wins every single game 5-0 between now and the end of the season. They still lost the league. The only league that mattered to them is gone. And that might sound ridiculous, and it might sound like you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. But that is what football fans do. And that is, like, I'm not speaking for the Celtic fans, but I can guarantee a vast majority of them will feel that way.
Yeah, hi to Zach. I'm quite aware we've had your comment on the screen quite a bit. How do you think that the club would be handling this manager situation if fans were allowed in the stadium? Just echoing what the other commenter had said as well. Now, we have been thrown about quite a few ifs and buts. If Celtic win, if Rangers win. One thing I picked up on, and I don't know if I've got this right, one of you might know and might be able to correct me, or someone in the comments can, but if Rangers win their next 3 games, their 4th is against Celtic at Celtic Park. If Celtic continue to win their next 3 games, then Rangers can seal the title on March the 21st at Celtic Park.
I think that's right. Because I think Rangers are 5 wins away from the title, but that's assuming that Celtic were to win all their games. So if that game at Parkhead would be the 4th game, which I think it will, and then that would obviously mean that they would get the 3 points and Celtic would get 0 points that week. So technically, I don't know whether it would be mathematically that would be it done or not, but it was. I mean, I think a lot of Celtic fans would probably be looking at that situation thinking, let's just chuck a game, let's just chuck a random game. They're not coming here and winning the title, no chance.
I wouldn't be surprised, mate. Talking about surprises, going back to clubs announcing losses, obviously Celtic have come out today. Anthony, are you surprised that maybe some smaller clubs haven't already fell by the wayside with the current pandemic?
Yeah, I said that a wee while back. It's astonishing that no Scottish club has encountered proper difficulties to the point where they can't continue. I'm really surprised at that. But obviously they have had a good bit of help, donations and things from the government and what have you. So I think, but that's only going to sustain them for so long. I think, I mean, there probably are some clubs right now who just don't know where their next sort of month's income's coming from. I mean, you saw Inverness were a wee bit up against it, but the Hearts donations last week obviously have helped them out massively. Yeah, I mean, in short, it's really surprising that nobody, I mean, hopefully that continues right into the new season when they can get fans back in. But obviously smaller clubs have, well, they had the relative luxury of not having to hire players until slightly later in the year because the season was delayed slightly. But now they're in a state where they're probably still having to pay their players on a part-time level whilst having no indication of when they're going to play again. So I dare say there will be some smaller clubs. I worry about clubs like Partick and Falkirk, sort of the full-time element, and they've not got any games at the moment. They can't even do the pay-per-view aspect of it at the minute, because obviously they're in League One. So, I mean, they're two clubs that obviously you would have concerns for, certainly in the short term. But yeah, I mean, it's a worrying time. I think you just need to hope that everybody can get through to the end of the season, and then there's a hope of obviously supporters getting back in the stadiums at the start of next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, over on the other side of Glasgow, there's been some news. Obviously, we've kind of said that, like we do every week, we seem to always be discussing an incident that's happened at Celtic, but there has been an incident over at the other side, and flying at the top league are Rangers, but there has been a probe opened, followed by a breakup of a Glasgow house party by Scottish police. Rangers' official Twitter account last night posted, "Rangers are aware of an alleged incident which is subject to an internal investigation. We will make no further comment." Obviously, COVID-19 restrictions, lockdown means that no indoor mixing of households is allowed in Scotland under normal circumstances. I think Nicola had something to say about this today, Stephen, did she not?
Yes, I don't think she was very, very happy. I think she was asked about it, and I think she just made a comment of, I don't really want to talk about Scottish football right now, because if I do, I'll get in trouble for swearing in a public place. So, yeah, you can take from that she's pretty furious. And to be honest with you, if I was anything to do with Rangers, I'd be furious as well. I mean, look, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Steven Gerrard should be drilling into these players, and to be fair, he probably is. Every single day at training, all we need to do is keep our nose clean. All we need to do is tick all the boxes, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, win 5 more games, and we're champions. And if this turns out to be true, and I think there's rumours that it was 2 players in a house party which was broken up. They were then allegedly given fines by the police, which were then obviously reported to the club. That's unforgivable. I mean, look what happened with George Edmondson and Jordan Jones earlier in the season. Look what happened with Bolingoli. Like, these football players at the start of this whole lockdown and the whole process could be given the excuse of they didn't know the rules. The Aberdeen players were probably a perfect example of that. They all went out for lunch thinking that they were all right because they were in a bubble. These players going and having a house party with people, like, what are they thinking about? It's just absolutely ridiculous. And quite rightly so, those 2 players should be carpeted. And I'm not just saying that, this would be the same if it was Motherwell, Kilmarnock, Celtic, Hibs, anyone. The club shouldn't be punished for that. That is not the club's. Like, it was obviously a Saturday night. The clubs can't control these guys 24 hours a day. But if they're doing something that's putting others at risk, then they should be the ones who are punished. Like, if I'd done something like that, my work don't get punished for something that I've done. So it should be the same way. But the thing that we would need to worry about is that Nicola Sturgeon will eventually at some point just go, I've had it with these guys.
That was my next question to you, Anthony. I mean, is incidents like this, maybe, is that putting Scottish football under a bit of pressure? Is Nicola maybe looking at incidents like these and thinking, do you know what, it's not worth it, we're going through an actual global pandemic here, there's more important things than football on a Saturday afternoon?
It will put football under the microscope, and it probably will put pressure on, but it shouldn't, in my view, because it's, as Stephen says, it's 2 idiotic individuals, if this proves to be correct. It's not Rangers Football Club. They've not instructed their players to go out partying or anything like that, if that is the case. I saw somebody mention this earlier on. Scottish football's coming under pressure. It's coming under the microscope. And it shouldn't be. I mean, fundamentally, it's just 2 young guys going out and have made a stupid decision. It's not football en masse. It's different to the Celtic situation where they went to Dubai as a full club. That was endorsed by the club. Whereas here, it's just 2 individuals making their own decision on a Saturday night. A club shouldn't, to put the whole of Scottish football at risk on the basis of a couple of numbskulls, that can't happen for me. I can see why it will, because we'll get a situation developing where people just see it as football misbehaving, which is rubbish. It's rubbish. I mean, if somebody in my street who happens to be a plumber or a joiner or whatever does something wrong, or if I do anything wrong, it's not any of us we're not representing our industry. Do you know what I mean? It's our own fault if we do something wrong. We deserve individual punishment, but you don't bring the whole industry down with you.
No, I get that. It'll be interesting to see how this one develops, if there is any truth in it, because like you mentioned, Stephen, last time Edmondson and Jones, they both actually got shipped off down to English clubs on loan. Jones went to Sunderland and Edmondson went to Derby, so it'll be interesting to see how Rangers handle that for a second time. Something else that's been obviously casting a shadow over Scottish football this week is the art of diving, Stephen, and this all comes today as Celtic left back Greg Taylor told St Mirren manager Jim Goodwin that he is no diver, and he's disappointed to have been accused of going down easily in his side win at Paisley last week. I mean, there has been quite a bit of talk about diving and how certain clubs have been punished over others, isn't there?
Yeah, there has been a lot of chat about it. To be honest, I think a lot of it comes down to how poor the officiating is in Scottish football. I think we kind of loosely talked about this maybe last week, it was maybe last week off the back of the Hearts Ayr United game. And I think every game I watch in Scotland, there seems to be a silly mistake from the referee or something that they miss. And I understand that they're probably it's a bit unfair on these Scottish refs because they're probably held to the same judgment as the English referees down south, and yet they don't have as anywhere near the technological advances that they have down south to help them or hinder them, depending how you want to look at it. But the fact is, that Greg Taylor incident, that was a dive. The Ayeti incident, it was a dive. But the thing is, there is contact on both of those occasions and both of those examples. So if you want to go into the nitty-gritty technicalities that, he did brush his thigh, or he, in Ayeti's case, Colin Doyle, I think the Velcro from his glove rubbed against his boot. I mean, we know, having played football, watched football for long enough, these are not things that are enough to put somebody down. But the fact is, the referees in this country, and they have been for a long time, are so poor that if I was in charge of a Scottish football club, this might be controversial to say, but I would be saying any touch you get, you go down, because number one, it's likely to be given, and number two, if you choose to try and stay on your feet and you're off balance, where a referee should give a penalty, but they quite often don't do it. If someone tries to be honest and stay on their feet, they use that as an excuse not to give the penalty. So I can see it from both sides. I can see why these players are doing what they're doing, and I'm not excusing them for doing it, but let's be honest, we all know that these are dives. These two examples that we're talking about are dives.
Yeah, I mean, if we actually look at the games from the weekend over at McDermott Park, it finished St Johnstone 1, Celtic 2. St Johnstone manager Callum Davidson says that he felt his players were denied 2 penalties as Celtic came from behind to win at McDermott Park on Sunday. Edouard got a double after going behind to a Rooney goal after 50 minutes. Like you said, Edouard's getting a bit of form about him now, Anthony. Did you see much of the game at all from Sunday?
I don't think Celtic were particularly inspiring in the early period of the game, and obviously they fell behind, and you think, here they go again. They've had this little winning run recently, and then they lose another goal, and you think, it's going to be another sticky afternoon for Celtic. But then they find a bit of resolve, which has maybe eluded them for a long part of the season. I think that bodes well. That people will say it was a scraped win, it was tight, lucky, whatever you want to call it, but on the other side of the city, Rangers are winning by 1 goal every week, and it's being lauded as a sign of champions, a sign of resilience and all that. Whereas with Celtic, it's just the way the narrative is at the moment, that because they've had such a shambolic season, it's viewed through a negative prism, and it's seen as a scrappy, unconvincing win. And that's going to be the way for Celtic. Unless they're blowing teams away, they're always going to be, their supporters are going to be at the very least demanding handsome victories week to week if they are going to have to stick with Neil Lennon for the time being. But I mean, I think in its own merit, that's a decent win for Celtic. You go behind at St Johnstone, it's not an easy place traditionally for any club to go. I mean, the Old Firm have had difficulties there over the years. So I think any kind of win, particularly in a situation where Celtic are, where they're not in a great vein overall, they're not full of confidence, I think that says quite a lot about them, that they're maybe starting to find something that they're able to eke that win out. Because St Johnstone are not exactly in a major rut themselves. I know they're in the bottom 6, but they're not whipping boys by any stretch. They're not the sort of team that anybody in the league would expect to go and batter 3 or 4-0. So yeah, it was a good win for Celtic, and the fact that Edouard's scoring regularly, seems to have rediscovered his form, that certainly bodes well for between now and the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I mean, how big a part is he, Anthony, to that Celtic squad? Because Lennon's come out and said that being settled has helped odds in Edouard return to form. After the Frenchman scored twice in 2 minutes as Celtic fought back behind against St Johnstone, as we've touched on, he makes us better. There is no doubt about that. Lennon told BBC Scotland that. How big a miss will he be if he does move on, Anthony?
He will be a big miss, but at the same time, I did say a few weeks back that they should sell him and cash in on him, so I'd be hypocritical to say that they shouldn't do that now just because he started scoring again, because we've always known he's a good player. He was just, until probably a month or two ago, his head probably wasn't there. He didn't seem to be the Edouard of last season and the season before. He didn't look like he was interested, I suppose. But when Edouard's playing at full belt, there's no striker like him in Scotland. He's as good as there is. He's top class, he's quality, he's a match winner. He's the player in the team that when Celtic are ticking, the opposition will think, oh no, we need to stop Edouard. I mean, he single-handedly won the Scottish Cup final for them a year and a half ago when he scored those 2 goals against Hearts. He's a difference maker on his day. He's quality, but at the same time, if his head's not in it, then if he was to be denied a move in the summer, we've seen already this season that he's not been brilliant for long periods of it. The worry would be that if he was kept at Celtic against his wishes next season, he resorts to that sort of underwhelming form that's sort of plagued his season so far. But yeah, when he's in this vein of form, he's a huge asset, and he's the sort of guy who, if they can keep him scoring and keep the service coming, then he's a notch above everything else they've got up front, and he will be hard to replace.
Yeah, absolutely. If we move on to Tannadice, it finished Dundee United 3, Livingston 0. David Martindale said he got it wrong as Livingston suffered their second successive Scottish Premiership defeat as both sides finished with 10 men. Now, people watching this might not be aware, or they might be. I do a Friday night chat show called the Salt and Sauce Chat Show. We actually caught up with David Martindale last week. We talked about his first defeat against St Johnstone, and here's what he had to say. Yeah, I mean, you experienced your first defeat, unfortunately, the weekend there. You went down to a strong St Johnstone side, 2-1 at home. Does tasting defeat now make you even more determined to get back to winning ways?
To be honest, David, I've been here for 7 years, probably been part of the first team squad properly as an assistant manager for 5 years. So you take the defeats in the chin. You try not to get too, it's an old cliche, but you try not to get too high when you're winning games. You try not to get too low when you're losing games. So I just focus on the next game, and I try and do that with the players. I say, forget it, it's done. You can't change the past. You can only shape the future. Put it to bed, forget about it. We dealt with it, move on. And obviously we're meant to have a game tonight. It's been called off, but Hamilton on Wednesday was the focus. So
that is now his second defeat in the row after the weekend's result against Dundee United. Stephen, has the honeymoon period possibly passed now for David Martindale?
Absolutely. He's in the Sugarly Peg Club now. Get him out.
Not at all. Nice guy.
Absolutely not. Nah, listen. It's Livingston. It is Livingston. Like, you've got to remind yourself that. Like, it was an absolute fairy tale run that they went on, and that should be applauded and should be lauded for the rooftops for what he's done with that group. But they don't have any divine right to go into games against the likes of Dundee United and expect to win these games. Like, I don't believe that 2 bad performances and 2 bad results is going to completely derail the good work that's been done at that club by Gary Holt and himself over the last couple of years. I just think that, a club like Livingston, it's the same as when we talked about Yogi a couple of weeks ago, that Yogi is a great manager and he's getting a message across to these players, but they're still mediocre players. Like, and I mean that with the greatest respect. And it's the same with the group of guys he's got at Livingston. They're still not a team who are going to go out and dominate week on week on week. Like, we're talking about guys like Edouard. Edouard, if he had half the pride in his own performance and the battle qualities that a lot of the Livingston squad had, then Edouard would not be playing at Celtic. He'd be playing at Barcelona or Real Madrid or one of the top Premiership clubs. He has got more ability in his left leg than most of that Livingston squad have got in their entire bodies. But that's not how football works. it's a team sport. So all he needs to do is just get another 11 guys or 15, 16 guys in that squad to keep buying into what he's been saying to them over the last 12 weeks and just keep plugging away, and they will get there. Like, they will win more games than they lose under David Martindale, I think.
Yeah, no, I think I kind of agree. Hi to Eamon, he's our new favourite viewer. He says, great podcast as a Celtic fan. I enjoy how impartial and honest you guys are, which we are every single week. Hi to Mr. Mack as well, who says the Martindale interview was quality. So I do appreciate that. It's still available on the State of Mind YouTube channel as well. Obviously, on the flip side to the Livingston game, Anthony, Mickey Mellon, he really needed a good 3 points, and he got it at the weekend, didn't he?
He did. He certainly needed it. We were speaking about him last week as a guy who'd sort of slipped under the radar in terms of he was neither up or down almost. He wasn't somebody we were raving about, but equally, until recently, he wasn't somebody we were talking about as being in the Sugarly Peg Club. But after the 5-1 against St Mirren? 5-1, the heavy defeat against St Mirren a couple of weeks ago, and then they lost to Hibs as well around that time. They were under the cosh a little bit, and there's certainly some dissenting voices emerging from within the Dundee United support, and so I think he was under real pressure. And I mean, nobody wants to come up against Livingston at the moment, especially not if you're needing a result. So to go and batter them 3, I mean, he'd beaten Ross County last week as well, Dundee United, so it wasn't like they were bang up against it at that particular point, but they've certainly bounced back in pretty emphatic fashion in terms of going away to Ross County and winning, and then smashing Livingston 3-0, because, as I said, Livingston are not a team that anybody wants to be facing at the moment just because of the vein of form they've been in. Going back to Livingston, what I would say is it's easy to assume they will just bounce back because they've done so well over the last few months that this is just a lull, and it may well be, and I think everybody hopes it's just a temporary lull. But the problem with football is it's such a confidence-inspired sport that they would have been flying Livingston for those 2 or 3 months when they were unbeatable against everybody, back-to-back draws against Celtic. They would have been feeling untouchable going into all those games. And now all of a sudden they've had 2 defeats, and the last one pretty chastening at Tannadice. So there will be, I suppose, a worry from a Livingston perspective that how much of that run was down to just feeling great and going on the pitch and just feeling invincible and everything clicking for them, and all this feel-good factor that was going around them, and the fairy tale talk about David Martindale. It's very hard to get that vibe back. It's not always. I mean, they could go and win their next game this weekend and just click back into gear, but it'll be easier said than done, because that positivity that comes with winning every week, that's not something that just comes. It's not. You can't just flick your fingers and it happens. It's something that you sort of have to develop over a period of time. So they'll be hoping if they can get back on the horse this week, then they can just say, all right, we've had a little blip, let's go again, and maintain that feel-good factor. But if it becomes a 3 or 4 game rut, then it's a different story. And if they go on and lose the cup final, suddenly there's a bit of negativity starts to engulf them. So I think everybody will be, as I've said several times, they're the big story out with the title race. Livingston have been the big talking point this season in terms of the feel-good factor. So I think everybody will be hoping that they can get back to the form they were in prior to these 2 defeats.
Yeah, absolutely. If we move over to Fir Park for the Lanarkshire Derby, it finished Motherwell 1, Hamilton Accies 4. Hamilton Accies showed that they're desperate to stay in the league after the Derby win over Motherwell, says manager Brian Rice. Team never really discussed, Stephen, as Motherwell. Are they in a bit of trouble?
Nah, well, up until this game, they had been absolutely flying. They had had a right good kick under Graham Alexander. But, I mean, Hamilton Accies, I can't be the only one that they just seem to take an absolute pleasure of mugging off anyone who thinks they know anything about Scottish football. I described their players as dog shit a few months ago. Said they were absolutely terrible. You look through it, you go player for player. They were just a group of guys that you think they wouldn't even hold their own in the Championship, never mind the SPL. But they just have this knack. They have this knowledge base somewhere within them. I think Brian Rice needs to be given massive plaudits for the job he does there. Every single year on year, they seem to survive when against all odds. And again, two games ago, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, I was thinking, right, Hamilton will probably go down, and then it's probably between Ross County and the. But you were writing off Hamilton. They then go and have such a great performance against Rangers, and then absolutely batter their local rivals. I think it's a great thing for Scottish football to have teams that can do that. But as I say, they just take pleasure in mugging people like me who think they know better. Maybe I should just learn to shut my mouth when it comes to little teams.
I mean, they've got players in that squad, Anthony, like say Ross Callaghan, who's really hit a good bit of form. I mean, how vital is it for like teams like Hamilton to have that kind of player in their squad?
I think with Hamilton, they're not about individuals as such. They're more about the team ethic. So it doesn't really, obviously having players that are standing out and making an impact is always good. But I think fundamentally with a team like Hamilton, it doesn't matter who's in the team in terms of individuals. I mean, I know they've had David Templeton as well, who's been a bit of a talisman for them at times. And prior to that, they had Ali Crawford. These were maybe the guys that you'd say were stuck out and made them tick. But I mean, fundamentally, Hamilton are the sort of team that you could pick any 11 players out their squad and they'll lose some games and then they'll step up and win a couple of games. They just have that real good team ethic, a bit like Livingston. But yeah, certainly it does help when you've got a guy like Callaghan who's hit a bit of form just now and seems to be getting positive reviews. And again, like Scott Robinson, he was one that was spoken about among Hearts supporters as a guy, was he one that got away sort of thing. And again, like Robinson, I don't think Hearts will have any regrets about letting him go. But he was a player that always showed good hunger, good appetite, good commitment, and wanted to seize his chance at Hearts. And he probably, in terms of quality, probably wasn't quite what they were after. In terms of a guy stepping up from League One to the Premiership to a club of Hearts calibre, I thought he did really well, and I thought he was worth a shot, and he held his own for that season he was there. He didn't disgrace himself by any stretch, but he's probably just lacking in terms of what Hearts supporters expect of a centre midfielder that's going to be playing week in, week out. He probably just wasn't quite there. But I think certainly, I've spoken to Gary Locke about Ross Callaghan. He raved about him. This was before he signed for Hearts and said he's a guy that can easily go up to the Premier League and hold his own. I'm sure he actually said he'd do a job for Hearts before he actually signed for Hearts. And you can see why, because he's got a good engine on him. He can get about the pitch. And I think Hamilton's probably the perfect sort of team for him in terms of being in the Premiership, but they're not a high-end team where they've got these expectations of real quality, refined performances every week, which you're going to get at Hearts, or you certainly have that expectation or the demands to produce that level of performance. Whereas at Hamilton, you're maybe with the smaller support and what have you, and slightly higher, lesser expectations, there is a chance for a guy like Callaghan to flourish a little bit and step up and almost lead by example, as opposed to just getting lost amid all the higher, bigger name players. And he certainly seems to be relishing being that talisman at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, moving on to the next game at Ibrox, we've touched on Rangers off-field antics, Stephen. On the park, they beat Kilmarnock 1-0 at the weekend, an absolute superb strike by Ryan Jack. It was some hit, wasn't it, mate?
Oh, it was an absolute beauty, yeah. As I think it was Anthony said earlier on, like, Celtic are getting absolutely lambasted for, well, not lambasted, but people are kind of turning their nose up to Celtic for the performances that they're putting in. Rangers put in a similarly dreary performance, which was only lit up by a moment of absolute genius from, I mean, it was just such a clean strike. It's such difficult technique as well, because he's obviously had to take the touch to kind of kill the momentum of the ball first and then smash it in the top corner. But over the last 4 or 5 matches, Rangers seem to have had that more times than not. They've had a couple of games where Hadji's scored the only goal, and it's they just look like they're just biding their time. They're waiting for the next 5, potentially 4, if David's lovely prediction comes in. Then it just seems like they're waiting their time. But that's what will make the story that we were talking about earlier so much more frustrating for Gerrard and McAllister and the coaching staff, that they are going about their business and they're getting things done in the right manner on the park, and they just don't want anything to derail that.
Yeah, I mean, Rangers are scraping ones, Anthony, like what's kind of replicating what Stephen just said there. Obviously the key thing for them is just to keep picking up the 3 points. Sometimes not pretty, but is that a sign of a champion winning squad where they just grind out that win?
Well, in this instance it is, because 1 year previously they felt a bit when they got themselves into this position. They were not playing well, but they weren't picking up results. Whereas now they're not playing well by their own standards, but they're picking up results. That's the fundamental difference. Had they gone into the new year top of the league, 15 points clear or whatever they were after the Celtic game, I can't remember what they were after the New Year game, but had they gone into the new year and just suddenly stopped playing and stopped picking up results, and they only had a couple of points since then, Celtic would still have fancied their chances of reeling them in. But the fact they've been winning all these games, they beat Kilmarnock at the weekend there, and they've had, I think, 7 of their last 8 victories have been by a 1-goal margin, if I'm right, something like that anyway. But they've only won once by more than 1 goal in the last 8 games. I think that was the Ross County game. So all these 1-goal victories that they're getting are all amassing to several points. So, I mean, it's the cumulative effect of just continuing to win, and it's making it impossible for Celtic to make any ground on them, because Celtic have hit a wee bit of form and they can't make any inroads into them. They'll have a little chance to cut the gap to 15 points if they win their game in hand tomorrow, Wednesday. But then Rangers have put so much daylight between the teams now that even if Celtic were to win the last 2 Old Firm games, they'd still need to make up another 9 points, which at Rangers' current winning rate is not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're giving Rangers credit for obviously grinding out a 1-0 win, but does Tommy Wright maybe need some credit now, Stephen? Has he come in and maybe started to try and steady the ship?
I think they looked a lot better from what I've seen of them in the last few months. They looked like they had more of a plan. They were more structured. Just the things that you would expect a Tommy Wright team to be. I think, again, we touched on this a couple of weeks ago, that their main issue will be creating chances, scoring goals. The fact that they've brought in Kyle Lafferty now, I think that could potentially be the signing that pushes them over the line in terms of Lafferty's quite likely, or if he gets a decent enough service, he could potentially get 5, 6, 7 goals between now and the end of the season, and that could be the difference. Because I think if Tommy Wright can set up the team in the way that Steve Clarke used to do, where they were really difficult to break down, really hard to beat, and they can find someone who's maybe going to get the odd goal here and there, then I think they'll be perfectly fine. But I think it's a good bit of business for Tommy Wright, and I can definitely see an improvement in their organisation so far.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, if we go up to Pittodrie at the weekend, it finished Aberdeen 0, St Mirren 0. That's the Dons now went a 5th match without a goal in Saturday's draw at St Mirren. There was a story that come out about the Aberdeen chairman. He's backed out of a Q&A session with the fans. Does that maybe show a little bit of worry, that they're worried obviously what the fans are going to put at him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was bad timing in the first place to organise such a Q&A at a time when the manager's back's up against the wall. There's so many supporters want Derek McInnes out. I think that was a pretty naive move by the chairman to try and initiate this Q&A, because it was pretty obvious that they're going to get bombarded with questions about Derek McInnes and his future. And the chairman said that it was going to be a transparent, any question goes sort of thing. So you're going to have supporters asking what's happening with Derek McInnes. I think that puts, whether you think McInnes is the man or not, I think that puts the manager in a really difficult position. If you've got the chairman openly discussing his future with supporters online, I don't think that's a good look. I don't think it is particularly reassuring, even for the chairman, for the manager. Sorry, I think it was a pretty poor move PR-wise, and although it looks terrible that they've subsequently closed it down, it's probably for the best in a way, even though it's given fans more ammo just to point out how flawed the initial decision was. I think Derek McInnes will be relieved that it's not going ahead, and I dare say Derek McInnes has probably said, can we call this off, because it's not going to look good.
That was the point I was going to say there. That do you think this has come from McInnes? Do you think he's went to the chairman and said, I'm not having this. I'm not having you discussing my potential future with the fans in such an open forum? Like, you've literally put out a statement. What else is there more to say?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like to say whether he has or not, but I mean, it's certainly somebody at Aberdeen has said to Dave Cormack, this is not a good idea, whether that's the press officer or Derek McInnes himself. I mean, these are the sort of things you do when the going's relatively good, when everybody's happy and everybody just wants to ask, you know what I mean? You don't put yourself in that position whereby anybody out there can just have carte blanche to ask you anything they want about the football club, and you know that 95% of the questions are going to be negative and about staff members, particularly the manager. I don't see what Aberdeen had to gain by that. People are not, whether Dave Cormack has legitimate points or not in terms of defending Derek McInnes. Derek McInnes's critics just don't want to hear it. You could make a really compelling case for Derek McInnes to stay in the Aberdeen job, and those who want Derek McInnes out will not buy it, whether it comes from the chairman, whether it comes from you or I. People have made up their mind, and having a Q&A with the chairman is not going to change their mind about whether Derek McInnes is the man for the job. So I don't really see what was to be gained by holding that event at this particular time. I think it's, in many ways, Aberdeen are now entering similar territory to where Celtic have been for much of the past 4 or 5 months in terms of things not looking good from the outside, the manager being under the cosh, and almost like the team's just going through the motions a little bit and drifting towards some sort of car crash at some point. I mean, I've defended Derek McInnes almost every week we speak about him, and I would still defend his record till I'm blue in the face, but I'm not naive enough to know that the mood music isn't great for Derek McInnes at the moment. The supporters are turning, and with every result, like Saturdays where they draw at home to St Mirren, I mean, that's a result. When Aberdeen's back's against the wall, they usually come out and pull out a result in a game like that. And I thought it was pretty telling that they didn't get the result in this instance. It feels like, not necessarily that Derek McInnes has suddenly lost his way, but it feels like things are drifting towards an inevitable conclusion now. I mean, that's Hibs now 4 points clear of Aberdeen with no games in hand. So third place is Hibs to throw away. And I think if Aberdeen finish fourth, or even worse still, slip out of the top four, then it's going to be pretty hard for Dave Cormack to convince the Aberdeen fans that Derek McInnes is the man still to continue taking them forward.
Yeah, thanks to Joseph for the message. It would be nice to see what McInnes could do with some money behind him. Now that's an interesting point. Take that on board, Joseph. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? Let's look at his counterpart, Stephen, on Saturday. Jim Goodwin, he's just signed a new deal with St Mirren, which will keep him at the club for another 3 years, I believe it is. If you look at his record, he's beat both Celtic and Rangers. He's climbed the table with St Mirren on a short budget. I think he is, but would you say he was one of the best young managers in Scotland?
Yeah. I think the next... I mean, I would be very surprised if Aberdeen chose to get rid of Derek McInnes. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't very high up on their list of people who would potentially get that job. And I mean that is no disrespect to St Mirren, but obviously Aberdeen, Hearts, Hibs are all in a kind of different category within that league. I think he's very similar to Jack Ross in terms of his pathway, and I think he's equally as impressive as Jack Ross was at the same point as being St Mirren manager, if not better. He's actually done arguably a better job in the time that he's been there. He's got an eye for players. He's brought in a lot of talented guys. He seems to structure the team really well. I watched the game that they played Celtic during the week, and although Celtic were comfortable winners, I thought for large swathes of that game, he had that team looking really, really well organised, really well structured, and Celtic were finding it very difficult to break them down. So yeah, I think he's a guy who has a future out with St Mirren, and as far as I think that contract that he's signed up is great for both parties. St Mirren obviously tie him down, and he has that financial security of the next few years. But I don't see him being the St Mirren manager in 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, the other game that could have went ahead at the weekend was between Ross County and Hibs, which was postponed due to the bad weather up in Dingwall. On Friday in the Championship, Anthony, we seen them for the second week on the telly, where it finished Queen of the South.
There was no game on Friday. Let's just move on. We'll move on.
At Palmerston Park, it finished Queen of the South 1, Heart of Midlothian 1. Liam Boyce's 90th minute penalty salvaged a draw for the lacklustre Championship leaders, Hearts at Queen of the South. Now, that's 2 Fridays on the trot that the Hearts have been on the TV, both times not been the best of games. Are Hearts maybe letting their guard down, or are other teams starting to raise their game against the league leaders, Anthony?
It'll be a bit of both in terms of the performances. I think a lot of Hearts supporters would say performances have been pretty unconvincing for most of the season. I think that's slightly unfair when you look at the amount of goals they've scored. I think, except they've not been swashbuckling, they've not been exhilarating in many games, but they have had quite a few games. Dundee home springs to mind, Raith Rovers away, Queen of the South home, even Morton away, they went away and won 2-0, where they've done okay. I mean, Hearts haven't been particularly impressive this season in terms of the way they've played. They've not really captured the imagination of their supporters. But fundamentally, I've been banging on about it for ages. All Hearts need to do this season is get themselves out of this league. I know they've got a big budget and they should win the league regardless. But if you go back to the summer, I don't think any Hearts supporter was thinking we will scoosh this league. They were thinking we should win this league. We want to get up. We hope to get up. But I don't think anybody was thinking it was going to be quite as comfortable as it proved to be in 2015, because remember, this is the Hearts team that was in a pretty bad place when they got relegated. They weren't winning games. They had an expensively assembled team that many people felt was pretty dysfunctional. They had a lot of guys they wanted rid of. Robbie Nielsen's trying to change it as much as he can, but he's still got quite a lot of players there who were there last season. All Hearts needed for me this year was to get a winning mentality and win enough games to get themselves back to the Premiership. I know people will say they should be able to do more than that because they've got a monetary advantage over the rest of the league. But as we've spoken about several times before, it's not always that easy. Dundee United have had a significant monetary advantage in each of the years they were in the Championship, and they made real heavy weather of getting out of it. Equally, Hibs, they spent 3 years in the Championship, and even the year they eventually got up, they weren't particularly convincing either. And when Hibs actually got up, they were one of the best teams in Scotland the following season. Arguably should have finished second. And when Hearts went up, I know they were far better to watch when they won promotion, but they went straight up and finished third the following year. So I think as long as Hearts win this league, I don't think there should be too much read into how they played or whatever, unless they subsequently go and really struggle in the Premiership next year. But a lot of Hearts fans find it hard to compute that you can struggle against Queen of the South on a Friday night, but then go and do well against Celtic, Hibs, Aberdeen, Rangers next season in the Premiership. But bear in mind, this Hearts team, although they got relegated, they were perfectly capable of competing with Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen and Hibs on any given day. As we saw, they beat Rangers the last 2 times they played them. They've beaten Hibs the last 2 times they played them. They drew with Celtic in the cup final before losing on penalties. They competed with Aberdeen last season and they knocked them out the cup. So even though they're underwhelming in the Championship, I think if you put Aberdeen or Dundee United currently in the Championship, I'm not sure they would scoosh the Championship any better than Hearts are. I don't think they would be blitzing teams routinely. I think it's just, in the Championship, you just need to win. You just need to get out of it. Style comes later. I know people will say we should be building a style for when we go into the Premiership, but the Premiership's a totally different league, different demands. You get more chance to play in the Premiership because teams are a wee bit more open against you. In the Championship, Hearts are the standout team in terms of a scalp. Teams are sitting in, they're making it awkward. Whether you say they're professional footballers or not, it's going to naturally be very difficult to get yourself up for a cold Friday night at Palmerston or Ayr. That's human nature. It's not. I mean, these guys play at Hearts for a reason. They're not superstars. They're not robots. They're guys that are going to be. They'll rise to the occasion in the big game when there's a big crowd against Hibs or Celtic or Aberdeen. But when you have to go to Ayr, it's a different story on a Friday night. And it comes back to it. Just win your games, get promoted, get out this league, and then go again next season. I mean, I don't buy all this. The writings on the wall that Hearts are going to struggle next year. I don't buy that at all. If Hearts get out this league, I would confidently back them to finish in the top 6 next year, and I would probably say they'll finish in the top 4, regardless of how unconvincing they are between now and the end of the season.
Yeah, just very quickly, Stephen, do you agree with what Anthony said? Just win quickly and win ugly and get up rather than playing sexy football and maybe having a wee fight on your hands?
Yeah, I would prefer us to do both if you can, but obviously the most important thing is getting the points and getting up out the league. The one thing I would say is that I don't think they look like a team that are well coached at this moment in time. I don't think they look like a team who have a plan B. They don't seem to be able to break these teams down who sit with a low block. And like, I thought his recruitment in the January window would suggest that he'd saw what we had seen, and he was looking to get balls out wide quick, move the ball side to side, get the defence moving, and get boys up and down. Gary Mackay-Steven looks like he's never played on the wing in his life. Like he's just not, and that's maybe not Robbie Nielsen's fault, but yeah, I think we just need to kind of get the points on the board, get out the league. But I would be very worried at this moment in time if we were to go up with this squad of players, which obviously we won't, next season.
Yeah, hi to Joseph. He just said, need to slug it out and get out of the Championship. No, I think we all kind of agree on that one. One thing I do want to quickly touch on, I'll run through the fixtures this week coming up very shortly, and we're in the last couple of minutes of the show, but one thing I want to quickly touch on is obviously Ross County's game against Hibs was called off at the weekend because of a frozen pitch. Like we said, Palmerston Park down in Dumfries, that went ahead. It's a 3G, 4G park, artificial, whatever you want to call it. The only other game in the Championship to go ahead was Alloa and Arbroath at the Indigil Arena, or the Recreation Park, whatever you want to call it. Again, 4G, 3G artificial park, whatever you want to call it. Anthony, just in a couple of words, are you for or against artificial pitches at this level?
I don't think they look great in terms of the spectacle and what have you. I don't think it looks great, especially in the Premiership, having plastic pitches. But I understand why they're there. I mean, fundamentally, it comes down to cost, I think, in terms of teams can use them for their training. They don't need a training ground because they can just train on their own pitch. They can let the pitch out to people in the community during the week. So I understand. But in an ideal world, I would prefer that certainly our Premiership was all played on grass.
Yep. Stephen, what about you? I mean, because obviously if Ross County had an artificial park, their game against Hibs might well have gone ahead. I mean, we are in Scotland. I mean, it's not quite Iceland or...
Yeah, exactly. It's no Iceland, it's no Finland. Like, we're fair enough, we don't get the best weather here, but I would prefer us to move our calendar. I'd prefer us to do that than have as many artificial pitches as we do. I would prefer us to play more into the summer if we really needed to do that. But I don't like artificial pitches in any way, shape or form. They're all right for training on, but you see the bounce of the ball, the way things, it's just not a natural game. And I think it also gives the home side a massive advantage because they know the baubles, they know the bounces and it's just, for me, if we want to be taken seriously as a nation football wise, we need to, in the next 5 years, 10 years, we need to be putting in place no more artificial pitches.
Fair enough, guys. If we look at fixtures this week, there's 2 fixtures on Wednesday night. Celtic are at home against Aberdeen, which should be a good game. Derek McInnes up against a tough fixture there. St Mirren host Hamilton Accies as well on Wednesday night. On Saturday, it's Aberdeen at home against Kilmarnock. Hibs take on Hamilton Accies at Easter Road, and at Fir Park, it's Motherwell against St Johnstone. The final game on Saturday, St Mirren at home against Livingston. On Sunday, there's Glasgow games for both Rangers and Celtic. Rangers are at home at Ibrox against Dundee United, while Celtic travel up to Ross County. In the Championship on Wednesday night, Inverness Cali, they play Queen of the South at 6:30. On Saturday, it's Arbroath against Wraith, Ayr United against Inverness Cali Thistle, Dundee are at home against Queen of the South, it's Dunfermline against Alloa at East End Park, and Hearts are at Tynecastle against Greenock Morton. That's it. The show's kind of raced away from us tonight. Make sure you tune in same time next week at 6:30 for another edition of the Play On podcast. On behalf of Anthony Brown, Stephen Commons and myself, thanks for all the comments, thanks for watching, and we'll see you same time next Monday.